Hello, everybody. My name is Aiga Stockenberg, and I'm a transport economist in the West Africa and Nigeria unit, but I work globally, mostly on analytical work. I cannot be at the conference today, but I will discuss a little bit, present a little bit of what we did with Nightlight's data in a transport initiative in the BBIN region, which stands for Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. I will share my screen now. Okay, so as I mentioned, I will present a little bit of the data analysis that we have done already to inform the initial stages of strategic transport planning and exercise in BBIN. So the context for this work is a regional initiative called the Trade and Transport Facilitation Program in Eastern South Asia, or TTFESA, which has multiple components, many different analytical activities over the next 2 or 3 years. And its objective is to identify measures to ease policy, structural, and capacity constraints to regional connectivity, trade, and logistics in BBIN. And with the overall goal of promoting trade and reducing transport costs. And so in the next few years, some of the activities that will be undertaken as part of this program are a regional trade and transport review, which is basically a very detailed assessment of the corridor infrastructure, the transport costs, the secondary and tertiary road infrastructure in some cases, the regulatory environment, institutional environment, etc. Everything that relates to transport and trade facilitation. And then a little bit further down the road, we will do more of an impact analysis or wider economic benefits analysis of how specific improvements of the transport infrastructure and specifically the major corridors in the region, what kind of economic impacts they would have at the household and firm level. So these are the major corridors we're talking about in the region. There's 7 of them. They connect basically the main cities of Nepal, Bhutan, India, northeastern India, and Bangladesh to the ports. So the point of applying Nightlight's data at this stage, there are kind of 3 main reasons. One is to confirm where are these main economic corridors. We know where are their main roads approximately. We know from past data what are the main origins and destinations, but to get a better sense of the kind of economic corridor around the main roads and where are the main activity generators. That's kind of one of the applications of Nightlight's data. The second is to inform the broader dialogue with the client, or to kind of justify a little bit more why we're focusing on these specific corridors, is to try to express or estimate the economic equivalent of nighttime lights, specifically in these corridor buffer zones. So basically to say what is the economic weight or importance of the immediate corridor area in the overall GDP of a country or of the entire BBIN region. And then finally at this stage, another point of applying Nighttime Lights data was to try to look a little bit beyond the immediate corridor buffer areas and identify clusters of economic activity that also probably represent high activity or high freight generation areas and economic activity areas, but they might be a little bit removed from the corridor. But with the right secondary and tertiary transport links, they could be connected to the corridors. And so we could significantly broaden the overall economic benefits of improving the main corridor infrastructure. So the approach we have taken in this analysis is to, and here by we I mean the World Bank working together with New Light Technologies, is to use what's called a hexagon I guess, approach. And so to divide up the land area around the corridors in equivalent hexagons, each with a unique ID. And so to aggregate the sum of lights at that level. And we're looking at sum of lights from the last 7 years, 2013 to 2019, which allows generating sort of a panel of data, and also see how light intensity has changed over time. And then also we aggregate the lights at various administrative units like the country, state, and down to admin 2 and admin 3 for some countries. So this is the main kind of map showing the night lights intensity of the most recent year for which we have the data. And this is at the 10-kilometer radius around the corridor level, and each of those pixels is a hexagon, as I mentioned. And so what this allows us to see is basically what are the main high radiancy spots around the corridors. So intuitively, those are the cities, but also sometimes there are extended areas way beyond the cities. And it also allows us to see which of the corridors have potentially higher economic activity than others. So for instance, Kathmandu, Haldia, or Kathmandu, Kolkata seem to be have much more activity around it than, let's say, the Thimphu, Mongla. So this is kind of what I was saying about trying to identify high economic activity clusters that are a little bit away from the main corridor or the immediate corridor vicinity. So this is taking a 30-kilometer radius. And you can see that there are some that are at the very edge of these corridors that are also very high light intensity. And so, as I mentioned, these are kind of the areas we would want to look at down the road when we are undertaking this trade and transport review and identifying more specific priorities for secondary and tertiary infrastructure linking to the corridor. So we would specifically look at some of these bright spots on the edges of the corridor buffer zones. This is another interesting piece of analysis that was derived from this data, which is basically seeing where are the very top 5% on nighttime light intensity spots around all these 7 corridors. And then projecting them in 3D, and you can see kind of just the sheer relative magnitudes. I mean, Chittagong Port and Dhaka, as well as Kolkata, are the clear, and not really outliers, but they are, the intensity is way beyond anything observed in Nepal or Bhutan, let's say. So this is showing the median light intensity increase over time, and it's kind of interesting to see. Some areas have clearly grown or developed a lot since 2013. So especially on the Kathmandu Haldia corridor around Kolkata and Dhaka and Chittagong, which are the main activity generators anyway. But we also see, and at this point, we don't really know what the reasons are, but we see significant decline in some in intensity around some areas in northern India specifically, as well as also some on the border of Bangladesh. And this might be, later on when we look at this in more detail, we might be able to identify what are the drivers of this, what we're seeing. So it might be that the labor has migrated away from these areas because of certain industries closing. But at this point, we're just kind of diagnosing what has happened, not why. So then we also looked at, given that we had the hexagon-specific values, and also we're able to calculate what is the distance of each of these hexagons from the very center line of the corridor. You can also see what what is the kind of correlation between the median light and the distance of the hexagon from the center line, as well as the change over time in light intensity and the distance from the center line. And as it's quite intuitive, we can see that the further away from the center line this hexagon is, so let's say it's on the edge of this 10-kilometer buffer zone, the lesser on average the light intensity, and also the lesser the increase over time. So basically, the closer the hexagon was to the center of the corridor, the more light increased over time in the last 7 years. And this differs also across the corridors, which is kind of interesting. And then as I mentioned, we aggregated the nightlights, the SOL over smaller admin units to kind of have a broader view of, okay, these are the main corridors, but maybe around them there are certain admin areas that are also very high economic intensity, most probably. And so, as you can see, this is obviously the case in the main cities like Kolkata, Patna, several others. This is, I'm not going to go more in detail about this, but I'm just to mention that around the cities, what we decided was to expand the notion of the corridor a little bit. So it's not just a 10-kilometer radius that we're typically applying, but also kind of the broader admin area around the city, because we see that the light intensity is very high at much more than just a 10-kilometer radius. And this is an example of Bangladesh, with Chittagong and Dhaka being the main bright spots. And then finally, we tried to do a little bit of kind of estimation of what the light intensity means in terms of GDP generation. And these are estimates, not definitive figures by any means, but what we tried to do was to try to see what is the ratio between nighttime lights intensity and GDP at different admin levels, and taking the GDP figures from this paper by Ghosh et al. 2010, and then updated to more recent figures. And so we derived these ratios for different admin units, and then try to apply them to the hexagons of the corridors. And just from this graph, you can see that this ratio between 1 unit of nighttime lights and the GDP is quite different across the different geographic areas in the region. So, for instance, for Chittagong, it's nearly $1 million per one lights unit, compared to only let's say $57,000 or $58,000 in Bhutan on average, or 240,000, approximately 240,000 in Thimphu, Bhutan's capital. On average, we saw that this ratio is higher in the main metropolitan admin areas. And so then, applying these ratios, we try to kind of construct the GDP profile of the corridors, of the 7 corridors, and this is the outcome of that. Sorry. So we estimated, and I emphasize this is an approximation, that the 7 corridors together, the 10-kilometer radius around them, they generate approximately $291.3 billion in 2017. And the breakdown between the countries is that majority of that was in Bangladesh, of course, just by how many, as a function of how many of these corridors, but the total area of the corridors goes through the Bangladesh territory. And then the smallest was in Bhutan. And again, this is intuitive when you see in the map what is the share of the corridor taken up by Bhutan. And then on the left, you can kind of see also we derived the intensity of GDP generation per square kilometer. And it ranges quite widely from only, let's say, 0.78 on the Kathmandu-Mongla corridor to over 5 million per square kilometer on the Kolkata-Ankara-Agartala corridor. And so this is again, an estimation, but it kind of gives us a sense of the economic weight of these corridors in the overall regional economy. And hopefully going forward, we will be able to use this in when we think of the broader economic impact analysis that will be probably starting in a few months. So that's all I have. And thank you for listening. And I apologize again for not being able to attend in person.